Now, the plant in nearby Amherstburg that bottles Crown Royal, an iconic Canadian whiskey with a storied history, is closing and shifting work to south of the border.
Shock and sadness in Amherstburg. The Crown Royal bottling facility is closing.
So this is what I think about Crown Royal. That's what they could do. And I think everyone else should do the same thing.
He's annoyed over parent company Diageo's decision to move a bottling plant to the United States.
An iconic Canadian brand just walked out the door, and the country still can't believe it. Crown Royal, the whiskey that once stood as a symbol of Canadian pride, is now shifting its production across the border to the United States, leaving an entire community jobless and a nation stunned. And instead of fixing the economic environment that drove the company away, Doug Ford is smashing bottles on camera while the government throws public tantrums, as if outrage could replace solutions.
Big changes in the Canadian business world. First, businesses sending small packages to the U.S. will have to pay duties starting today. And a major booze bottling plant is shutting down in Amherstburg.
The shock began in Amherstburg, a town that had built its identity around the Crown Royal bottling plant for nearly a century. This wasn't just another workplace on the map. It was the engine that paid mortgages, raised families, and created generations of stability. Then, almost overnight, the announcement dropped. The plant was shutting down, the jobs were gone, and the bottling operations were being moved to the United States. No transition, no gradual window, just a closed door and a severed lifeline.
Amherstburg's largest employer is shutting down. Diageo has announced it will close its Crown Royal bottling plant in the town, a facility that has anchored that community for nearly a century, putting about 160 people out of work.
What makes this hit even harder is that nothing was failing. The whiskey is selling, the brand is thriving, the demand hasn't disappeared, the opportunity has. The only thing that changed was the reality that Canada is no longer a competitive place to keep a business alive. So now 160 workers are being pushed out, not because they did anything wrong, but because the system around them made staying there impossible. A town that once took pride in saying we bottle Crown Royal here now has to watch that legacy leave on the back of a corporate truck.
Crown Royal bottling facility you mentioned near the Detroit-Windsor border in Amherstburg, Ontario, is that community's largest employer. And some are pointing towards the Trump trade war as a motive for the move.
Crown Royal didn't leave because demand slowed or the brand faded. It left because Canada has become one of the hardest places in North America to run a business. Energy costs are climbing, taxes keep rising, and companies are forced to navigate layers of paperwork just to stay open. Running a factory here isn't just expensive, it's exhausting. Eventually, the math stopped making sense, and Crown Royal did what every business does when survival is on the line. It chose the environment where it could breathe. The parent company of Crown Royal says this decision reflects Diageo's efforts to continuously improve its North American supply chain and ensure the company is best positioned for long-term sustainable growth. Across the border, the United States has spent the last decade turning itself into a magnet for industry. Lower taxes, faster approvals, fewer regulatory traps, and a clear path to growth. The kind of stability corporations can build long-term decisions around. So when Crown Royal realized it could save millions simply by bottling in the U.S. instead of Ontario, the decision wasn't dramatic. It was inevitable. And this is not a one-company issue. It's a system failure. And once one major brand proves the exit route works, others won't hesitate to follow.
I made it clear to the company that they have a fight on their hands because it was basically reading me a letter with no details, just saying it was a business decision. You have generations of families that have worked there.
When Diageo announced the closure, they didn't call it a pullout or a shutdown. They called it streamlining the supply chain. That's corporate language for something much simpler. Our biggest market is the United States. So we're moving the jobs to the United States. The bottling, packaging, and distribution that once took place in Amherstburg will now be handled in Illinois, where the costs are lower and the system is easier to operate in. Meanwhile, bottling for Canadian shelves and export markets will be handled in Quebec, just enough to legally keep the Made in Canada label alive.
Yesterday was that the Crown Royal bottling plant will close down in February of next year. Diageo, the company that owns the plant, says after nearly a century of bottling the iconic Canadian whiskey brand.
On paper, the brand stays Canadian. In reality, the paychecks do not. This is how corporations leave without ever admitting they left. They wrap the decision in neutral language, efficiency, network alignment, market optimization. While entire towns are told to move on, like their livelihoods were just a temporary detail. The whiskey will still taste the same, the bottle will still look the same, the Crown Royal story will still talk about heritage and tradition, but the hands that once made it no longer have a place in that story.
In Ontario for a boycott of Crown Royal from liquor stores like the one behind me. There are concerns that employees and farmers in other provinces could be the ones on the receiving end.
The announcement hit deeper than a business headline. Crown Royal has lived inside Canadian culture for generations. On dinner tables, in celebration toasts, in family stories, in the quiet pride of knowing that something made here was respected everywhere. The brand carried a certain weight, not just taste, but identity. So when the news broke that production was moving south, people didn't react to a factory update. They reacted to a gut punch to national confidence.
Inside, crews bottle and package Crown Royal, filling, capping, and case packing before finished cases ship to distributors in Canada and the U.S.
A country measures itself by what it can build and keep. Losing a plant like this forces an uncomfortable realization. Industries that once felt permanent are now temporary. The kind of stability people assumed would last, entire towns built around skilled work and long-term employment, is no longer guaranteed. A symbol of Canadian craftsmanship is shifting its center of gravity to America, and people can feel the meaning in that. Crown Royal didn't fade or shrink. It evolved just without Canada in the picture the way it used to be. And that quiet change tells the real story of where the country is headed.
Pouring out his frustrations, Premier Doug Ford's photo op was seen across the country.
It is a publicity stunt in a sense. It is good TV.
What makes this even more staggering is the scale of the business Canada provided. Ontario has been one of Diageo's strongest revenue engines, with the LCBO purchasing hundreds of millions of dollars in their products every single year. Crown Royal wasn't a background label. It was front and center, a dependable profit stream supported by Canadian consumers and Canadian workers who built that reputation with consistency and pride.
That Ford's move could spill over and hurt Canadian workers. Crown Royal's parent company, Diageo, has large distilleries and bottling facilities in Valleyfield, Quebec, and Gimli, Manitoba.
And yet, the decision to walk away came down to approximately $8 million in wage savings. A community that gave the brand its identity was reduced to a line in a cost report. Generations of work, loyalty, and local legacy were outweighed by a budget adjustment small enough to get lost inside a corporate quarterly review. The message is blunt and impossible to dress up. The workforce was cheaper somewhere else.
That make whiskey here, buy Ontario people. That's what we need to do, is support each other. You know something, I'm gonna make this even come out quicker, because it's not coming out. I know Mayor Barry wants to lie on the floor right now with his mouth open.
While Canada was tightening regulations, raising energy costs, and layering new compliance rules on top of old ones, the United States was doing the exact opposite. Over the last decade, the U.S. has built an environment where production isn't just possible, it's encouraged. Lower corporate taxes, cheaper operational costs, faster approvals, and a government stance that treats industry as something to protect, not pressure. That's not ideology. That's a direct financial advantage companies can measure by the quarter.
I said, how can you do this to your largest customer in Ontario? I said, is there any incentives I can give you to stay here, to save these jobs? No, it's not happening. I said, so it is what it is.
So when Crown Royal's executives sat down at the table, the comparison wasn't emotional. It was brutally clear. On one side, a system where every year costs more, processes get slower, and businesses are treated like problems to be regulated. On the other side, a climate designed to attract investment, reward expansion, and let companies scale without fighting bureaucracy at every step. The U.S. didn't steal Crown Royal. It simply made staying there the smarter move. This is what happens when one country treats business growth like a threat and the other treats it like a national strategy. The border didn't move. The incentives did, and Crown Royal followed the incentives.
This town relies on this company.
In Amherstburg, the news didn't feel like a corporate update. It felt like a loss of heartbeat. The Crown Royal bottling plant wasn't just a job site. It was the rhythm of daily life. Entire families worked there. sometimes across 3 generations. Paychecks from that plant paid for mortgages, college tuition, first cars, and steady lives. It was the kind of workplace people believed would always be there. Then with one announcement, that belief was erased. Workers walked out of the meeting in shock. Some were angry, others were quiet. Many were just numb, not because they didn't understand business, but because they had trusted that their loyalty meant something. They weren't replaced because they failed. They were replaced because a spreadsheet said someone cheaper existed somewhere else.
Is that community's largest employer, and some are pointing towards the Trump trade war as a motive for the move.
We need to maintain the jobs. Without the jobs, we become a bedroom community, and I, as mayor, do not want that. We're trying to increase our commercial industrial base. We've been very successful in the last year.
The town now faces a silence it has never known. The plant was more than economic infrastructure. It was identity, the sound of production, shift changes, trucks coming and going. That noise told everyone the town was alive. Take that away, and what remains is a place forced to redefine itself from scratch. This is the part of the story no press release ever mentions. When a company leaves, it doesn't just remove jobs, it removes purpose.
Roughly 80% of rye, corn, and barley used in Crown Royal is sourced from Manitoba and from farms in other Canadian provinces.
Could a boycott actually backfire?
When the shutdown became
Canadians?
public, the response from leadership looked less like governance and more like theater. Doug Ford stepped in front of cameras with a bottle of Crown Royal, poured it out on the ground, and declared he would pull the brand and possibly Smoff next from LCBO shelves. It was loud, dramatic, and designed to look like strength, but it didn't protect a single job, reopen a single door, or change a single decision already made in a boardroom thousands of miles away. The display played well for headlines, but it didn't answer the question every worker was asking. What happens to us now? At the same time, Mark Carney said nothing at all. No explanation, no strategy, no acknowledgement of the item, consequences unfolding across a community that trusted the system he helped shape, one leader shouting with no plan, another leader silent with no accountability, both reactions pointing to the same problem. There was never a plan to keep industry here in the first place.
Yeah, Melissa, Ontarians looking to buy Crown Royal and Smirnoff and other Diageo products may soon be out of luck. The Premier says pulling those products off LCBO shelves is the only way to hold the company accountable for job losses.
The reaction from leadership wasn't focused on fixing the conditions that drove Crown Royal out. It focused on punishing the company for leaving. That's the core issue. Instead of asking why businesses no longer feel safe investing in Canada, the government chose to perform outrage and call it action. It's easier to yell on camera than to address energy prices, tax pressure, regulatory gridlock, and the slow, grinding bureaucracy that has been choking the industry for years. The anger wasn't strategic. It was defensive. It was the reaction of a government caught off guard by a crisis it helped create. While Ford was threatening to rip bottles off shelves, not a single policy was introduced to make Ontario competitive again. No plan to reduce operational costs. No discussion about cutting approval timelines. No move to streamline regulation. Nothing that would make the next company think twice about leaving. And companies are paying attention not to the anger, but to the absence of solutions.
A message to all the bigwigs at Diageo. I swear to God, those bottles of Crown Royal are coming off the LCBO shelves when the last person walks out through that door.
Crown Royal is not leaving alone. It's part of a broader shift happening across Canada's industrial sector. Companies involved in manufacturing, food production, packaging, and processing have already begun moving operations to the United States because the cost structure, regulatory environment, and speed of doing business are simply more favorable there. The U.S. offers clear rules and predictable expenses, while Canada continues to burden companies with delays, high overhead, and layers of compliance. Executives don't argue about loyalty or heritage. They look at the numbers and relocate. The concern now isn't the plant that closed, but the companies quietly assessing whether they're next. Crown Royal didn't create this trend, it exposed it.
How Canada weighs its trade deficit is what it imports versus what it exports. So losing $19.6 billion in Q2